Life, culture, and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 with Neil Johnson on Vision.
Do you ever think of an acting career? A new coaching program is about to launch that will be available nationally online. Elliot Bonsor is the host of a podcast called Artvance, which is a worship and arts podcast going after God's heart for the arts industry. Let's get some insights. Elliot, a special welcome along to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. It's great to be here.
Elliot, an extension of Artvance, and you're preparing to launch this coaching program for screen actors. Give us some insights into what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Well, Artvance, the goal of Artvance started as a podcast, and now it's developing more into a bit more of a holistic pursuit of God's heart for the arts industry. And my background being in arts and entertainment, it's just really applicable. And I just really believe God's heart burns for artists to really shine in their God-given gift, but also in representing Him to the industry itself.
Now, your story is that you were pursuing a career in the arts when somehow or other God got a hold of your heart and took you in a different direction. What is your story here?
Yeah, well, I was always passionate about acting, and I was always living in my imagination as a child. And it was when I was about 14, 15 years old, I really started taking it seriously and started auditioning for TV commercials and working on different projects. And I was a bit of a school dropout, which is funny that I work in education now, but I actually left school in year 7, which was age of 12. But my parents were really supportive of me, and I ended up working part-time from that age and paid off my first camera. And so that developed, and I got really serious about it. And then one day God said, would you just lay it down and pursue me and go and do some ministry school to get equipped? And of course, I was so in love with the Lord. I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll lay it down. And that was that. But what I didn't realize over the years was some of my religious zeal has gone on to bury the talent instead of just lay it down. And so now the Lord's calling me to pick it up and really empower and support other actors who are really, or people who want to enter into the industry and feel a calling from the Lord that their time is to take their place and represent Him in that space.
Do you feel like it's sometimes the case that as Christians, we're almost fearful of moving into an acting career because, there's reputations and all sorts of things in there. But when we are gifted, when we're creative, when we're storytellers, that is a career perhaps that we ought to pursue, not to hold back from.
Absolutely. I believe the arts belong to the Lord. God was first revealed as creator in Genesis, and then His next greatest creation was to create something very good, which is man and woman in His likeness. And therefore we have it in our DNA as children of God to create. And so when we don't create, we kind of miss out on that necessity of His signature in our lives. And so, I believe the arts belongs to the Lord. Stories have always been from the master storyteller. And I really believe it's a critical time for sons and daughters to take their place.
On your Artvance podcast, you're interviewing leading voices in film and entertainment and music and visual arts. What sort of people are you talking to? You got any names you can drop?
Yeah, I can. So we've recently had a personal hero of mine. Those who are in the charismatic movement would know who Brian Dirksen is. He's the writer of Come Now is the Time to Worship. And he's not just a songwriter. He's actually got visions for films and plays. And the story behind Come Now is the Time to Worship was actually a play that didn't work out, and they lost a lot of money over it. And God actually restored them through that song. So that's one person. We've also had Roma Waterman, who's a songwriter in Australia, quite renowned. We've had the Nkotra brothers, who are filmmakers from the Central Coast, and they're amazing at what they do. And Nathaniel Oliveri, who's the CEO of The Normal Christian Life, who's a filmmaker, screenwriter, and has a huge heart for missions in that area. So they're just a few of the names we've had in this first season of Artvance.
You've got older people listening to our conversation, and you've got younger people listening to our conversation. It's those younger listeners who are attuned to social media, who are into editing their own video clips. They're into all sorts of ways of directing their own acting abilities in some sense and telling stories in a way that they perhaps weren't able to do in past generations because the technology didn't allow it to be done so easily. Is it young people in particular who are likely to be interested in doing what you're doing?
Yes and no, Neil. I think, yes, there is a general, people are drawn to and captivated by that in my generation and younger, but I believe God's calling fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, grandfathers and grandmothers to take their place as storytellers in the industry, because we actually need to heal the generation gap in the arts and how it's represented to the world anyway. So yes and no. That's my answer.
In your earlier years, you did some television acting. Anything we might be familiar with?
Oh, just some television commercials, just some very, very small roles, but it was enough to give me a taste for the industry.
And when you've got a passion for filmmaking and screen acting, now you're teaching something like 350 people every week. And these are obviously people a little bit like yourself, wanting to pursue something of a passion. They recognise they can do that with some guidance and perhaps with some camaraderie that comes with being part of a larger group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's within a school context. I'm very blessed to be at Livingston Christian College, where they are really championing the arts from a kingdom context. And so these students, yes, they're young and vibrant, they have fresh ideas, and they're also ready to learn what it means to grow into that creative gifting with a context in being in Christ, understanding what it means. How does my sonship, how does my being a son or daughter of God play out in this creative context? So, yeah, that's really important.
Let's talk about being a Christian, because in an industry that has a reputation for drawing people away from their faith, clearly you've got to get experience in that industry before you can perhaps even break free and conquer that industry and then pursue those issues around the arts that are actually shaped by your own Christian faith when that comes to maturity. That's the sort of thing you've got people on a trajectory, on some sort of a growth path, a learning curve.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reputation we've seen from the industry is that, and sometimes it's been attacked by some of our own judgments that, it's overall evil because of some of the poor things that are represented in it. But behind the scenes, God is always doing stuff behind the scenes that we don't always see. And I thank God for so many media channels and different people who are beginning to pull out the stories of what God is doing behind the industry. Like just recently, Shia LaBeouf, which is a very, very famous actor, known for his foul mouth in recent years, has just come to fall in love with Jesus and is being very open about his faith because of a role he had to play as a Catholic priest in a movie that's not yet released. And I think that's a bit of a picture of what God is doing underground in some ways. It's like an underground church in Hollywood and in Australia as well that we're just not seeing yet. But I believe we're about to see a huge wellspring of God doing amazing transformational work in people's lives.
I think I remember him from the Transformer movies.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's him.
Realizing that God has designed you and I to create and tell stories. Sometimes we know we have that passion within, we just don't know how to get it out. You've got some keys to unlocking those skills and those abilities and letting the freedom to create really take hold.
Yeah, exactly. And freedom's the key word there, Neil. I think so often if we have a long road in Christianity, we can sometimes begin to develop a subconscious shame or stigma attached to things that are artistic and sometimes that are overtly expressed in what we would perceive to be ungodly ways. But I believe God's recovering and redeeming these things for people, and we need to actually be more confident than ever to be free in our art as we do it intimately hand in hand with God.
And you're working with people not only to be in front of the camera, but behind the camera. You're taking things to all sorts of depths around production. And obviously you're wanting to take stories and turn those into scripts. There's an awful lot of dimensions that happen in the film and television and arts industries that sometimes people don't think of. They're only thinking of the people who are up front in front of the camera.
Yeah, I believe everyone has a story to tell, and so many actors now are actually finishing up their acting, but they're going on to continue screenwriting and directing their own works, like people such as Denzel Washington, who's actually said, I'm now going to be a minister in Hollywood. That's my full-time gig. That's the mantle God's given me, is to minister the good news of Jesus to people. But meanwhile, yes, he's still acting in a few projects, but the dominating work that he's doing is mainly writing and directing, and in that place, ministering the good news of Jesus to people as well.
Elliot, you mentioned the screen acting workshop that's coming up. Now, this is going to be the end of October, so it's still a little way away yet, but this is a good time to connect with you, to register to be a part of that, what sort of things will you take people through in this workshop?
Yeah, so this will be happening in South Brisbane at 123 Paradise Road, which is a place called Grace House in Slacks Creek. It'll be an afternoon workshop from 1 p.m. through to 4 p.m, where we're going to delve into character techniques, understanding script analysis, self-tape training, so people can learn how to develop their own portfolio of characters they can play. And we're going to play around with it. It's going to be a safe place where people can freely express their gifting, rub shoulders with other people of a like mind, and also understand at the context of all this creativity, where's God's heart? Where's his story shining through, and how is he calling me to be a part of that story and take my place? So that's going to be the 3-hour workshop in the afternoon on Saturday, the 29th of October. And then we're going to follow it up that night with a night of worship to allow ourselves to hear from God. What are you saying to me about my assignment for film and television? Where do you want me to go? Who do you want me to meet? How are you going to lead me into this? Because I really believe at the end of the day, it comes down to people hearing from God themselves that propels them to have a fruitful life in that industry.
And for those who want to connect with your Art Vance podcasts, what sort of things are they likely to be exposed to? Some of the topics that you're talking about with some of those famous names that you mentioned earlier.
A lot about creative process and how does our connection and intimacy with God bear fruit in our creative process. I think that's been a dominant theme. Also being courageous about creating and not being shy and actually boldly coming before the throne of grace, realizing from God all creativity is at our hands, within reach. So there's a lot around that, around personality and how God has uniquely formed people to be creative. Songwriting, film and television writing. We cover as many art dimensions as we can because it is the unboxable industry. Like there's so many arms and expressions of art that we just don't touch the surface in one conversation.
Well, Elliot Bonsu is the host of a podcast called Art Vance, which is a worship and arts podcast going after God's heart for the arts industry. What's coming up also is this screen acting workshop on the 29th of October, and you can access those Art Vance podcasts on Apple Podcasts, and it's at that point too you'll be able to connect with Elliot. You can send a message. You can also find him on Instagram and on Facebook under the name Sounds of Soaring Ministries. Elliot, all the best with what you're doing. Keep us up to date. Thanks so much for joining us today on 2020.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil. I appreciate it.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.